is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Hello and welcome to Global Business Europe, live from CGTN in London. I'm Jamie Owen.
And I'm Robin Dwyer. Our top stories. Afghans wait in hope as the international evacuation operation at Kabul airport is intensified amid reports of murders and torture at the hands of the Taliban.
NATO foreign ministers meet in emergency session urging the Taliban to allow the safe passage of all foreign nationals.
Merkel in Moscow. The German Chancellor meets President Putin with Afghanistan and Alexei Navalny on the agenda.
And a walk on the wild side, China's adventures adding a few upgrades to their space station. Taliban rule is slowly establishing itself in many parts of Afghanistan as international governments step up the pace of evacuations at Kabul airport. Stun grenades have been used to hold back the crowds of people still trying to flee. Reports are emerging of murders and torture by the Taliban against minority groups in other parts of the country, as well as house-to-house searches.
Meanwhile, the United Nations has warned a humanitarian crisis of incredible proportions is unfolding, with up to 14 million people facing severe hunger. Let's talk now to our correspondent Zamarulai Abasin in Kabul. So, Zamarulai, continuing scenes of chaos at Kabul airport as evacuations continue. What more can you tell us?
Hello, Robin. The evacuation process continues. Thousands of people are inside Kabul or Hamid Karzai International Airport, and people are struggling still to the embassies and foreign mission, which most of them are already evacuated and no one is there. And we also hear voices of bullets inside the Kabul airport, and then we also get reports that in some cases Taliban also bother those who want to flee the country, go inside the Kabul airport. But the situation remains retreating at Kabul airport, while we receive other reports from Qatar that those who have fled from Kabul by the U.S. planes or landed right at the heart of Qatar, and they have very bad situation. The traumatic situation is still roaring all around the Kabul airport, and at the same time the city feel much calm. There is no incident reported, and the people are feeling secure, but the concern about their future, lack of jobs, banks closed, and all these things that belong to their future are concerning. Robin.
Okay, Zamarulai Abasin in Kabul, thank you.
Well, several NATO allies say they're hoping to keep Kabul airport open beyond the end of August to facilitate those evacuations. Foreign ministers from the alliance held an emergency session on Afghanistan, with Secretary-General Stoltenberg calling on the Taliban to uphold the fundamental rights of all Afghans. Let's talk to our correspondent Lucy Hoff in Brussels. Lucy, NATO is a military alliance, not a humanitarian one, so what are they discussing now?
Well, Jamie, as you said there, the immediate focus of the NATO's alliance is at the moment the safe evacuation of thousands more people stranded at Kabul airport, amongst them citizens from NATO member states and at-risk Afghan citizens, who, particularly those who have helped Western forces on the ground over the course of the last few years. So there has been talk from the US's side about a deadline of August the 31st for those evacuation flights. Efforts are being stepped up to evacuate those who remain. The EU, for example, has identified 300 more of its own staff working for European delegations on the ground who need to be evacuated in the coming days. So that was very much the focus of NATO's discussions today as part of this meeting of foreign ministers. There has been a warning to the Taliban to allow for the safe passage for those who wish to evacuate, and for the Taliban not to allow there to be a political vacuum where terrorism could thrive moving forward, urging the Taliban to adhere by international law and to uphold fundamental rights, particularly those of women and girls.
Joe Biden was supposed to bring diplomacy back to U.S. foreign policy after the President Trump years. I wonder how much of a strain is this Afghanistan crisis putting on NATO and its members?
Yeah, I mean, that's right. When Joe Biden, the US president, walked into a NATO summit in person here in Brussels back in June, his message was America is back, that America was back as a dependable ally. But what we have seen from the chaos of this withdrawal from Afghanistan is real questions being asked in Europe about to what extent America can truly be relied on as a transatlantic partner. The message from Jens Stoltenberg on that point was defensive today. He said that the transatlantic alliance remained strong, that this had had no impact on relations, but we know that there are questions being asked here amongst European leaders about Europe's own defence capabilities, about NATO's over-reliance on the United States, that NATO's withdrawal from Afghanistan essentially forced the hand of other European and Western allies. So big questions to be asked, and certainly the ramifications of this will be felt for some time to come.
And Lucy, lots of debate in the UK about why the other NATO members perhaps couldn't have remained in Afghanistan after the US withdrawal, but that is simply fanciful, isn't it?
Well, yeah, as I say, I mean, there are so many questions being asked here about, Article 5, that founding principle of NATO, whereby if there is an attack against one member state, it is an attack against all member states. And that is why NATO went in to Afghanistan following the United States 20 years ago. And yet this withdrawal has shown huge vulnerabilities in NATO and in the over-reliance, as I say, on the United States. So we know, for example, that the UK Defence Minister, Ben Wallace, had suggested that there should be some continued operations on the ground involving NATO allies with the exemption of the United States, but those calls were rebuffed, and questions now about why they weren't heeded to. There has been a lot of soul-searching in the United Kingdom about its intelligence that it was receiving, about its lack of foresight, about the implications of the US's decision, and the swift decision of NATO members such as the UK and Germany to follow suit despite an awareness of the risks. So, yeah, a lot of long-term soul-searching and, as I say, the implications of this on whether or not European allies start to develop their own autonomy away from the United States in the long term will, of course, remain to be seen.
Lucy Hoff in Brussels, thank you very much.
And Afghanistan has been top of the agenda for German Chancellor Angela Merkel during talks with Russia's President Vladimir Putin. It's Merkel's final official visit to Moscow before she steps down as leader after nearly 16 years. Well, let's talk now to our correspondent Stuart Smith in Moscow. So, Stuart, we've heard from the two leaders within the past hour. What have they had to say?
Well, very different focuses. Angela Merkel talking particularly about ensuring human rights are respected by the Taliban and getting German citizens and translators who helped Germany in Afghanistan, getting them out of the country. Different to President Putin, whose biggest focus was making sure, or reiterating, Russia's line, which is about making sure that peace and stability is ensured in Afghanistan without the intervention, without the cajoling of the West, and making sure that any future for Afghanistan is one which doesn't have political, social and economic, undue political, social and economic influence from outside forces. President Putin's a big fan of the United Nations Security Council taking this issue forwards, which is, of course, Russia is, of course, a member. In particular, he says that, in particular, Angela Merkel said that Russia might be able to help Germany with evacuating these translators and citizens because Russia has such strong ties with the Taliban after helping to try and negotiate peace talks between the Taliban and the Afghan government for several years. Russia rather nonplussed by any of this because the Taliban have such a good relationship with the country, and the embassy, its staff, and the relationship seems to be only getting stronger.
And these talks have been called the farewell talks because they mark the end of one of Europe's oldest and most complex political relationships.
Indeed they do, yes. And Angela Merkel paid homage to that, saying that she has been to Russia every year of her chancellorship, 16 visits in 16 years, and that's throughout some very turbulent times in German-Russian relations, most recently with the poisoning of Alexei Navalny. And Russia just today issued another statement talking about how problematic Russia finds it that Germany has not been providing the sort of evidence of the poisoning that Russia requires. Germany, on the other hand, says it's completely clear what happened and even hosted Alexei Navalny, the anti-corruption campaigner who fled to Germany when poisoned with Novichok. That's Germany's line. Russia says it's a completely different situation that went on, but both leaders still managed to meet at visits like this to talk about a variety of different problems. But Angela Merkel insisted at the end of the press conference she's still demanding the release of Alexei Navalny from prison in what she's calling a politically motivated imprisonment.
And alongside Afghanistan and Alexei Navalny, plenty of other topics on the agenda for the two to talk about.
Yes, and actually there's one issue which is very controversial within Europe and the United States, but Germany and Russia see eye to eye on, and that's Nord Stream 2, a gas pipeline which is being built, it's 99% complete, is effectively finished, going from Russia to Europe via the Baltic Sea. That's going to allow Germany and Europe to import more gas from Russia, but the big dispute, the big disagreement is that it's going to avoid Ukraine. It will allow Russia to get gas to the European Union by avoiding Ukraine. And what that could mean for Ukraine, or Ukraine's fear, is that Russia could become more aggressive, knowing that it doesn't rely on Ukraine to get its gas into Europe. And that will be one discussion, or one point of discussion, when Angela Merkel visits Kiev and meets with the Ukrainian president on Sunday.
So, Stuart, these are the final talks between these two particular leaders, but even when Mrs. Merkel has gone, this will still be a difficult relationship, no matter who takes over.
It will be a difficult relationship, certainly. Germany is seen in Russia as effectively, well, with France also representing the European Union, which relations with Russia are even more fraught than just the bilateral relations. Angela Merkel was invited back to Russia by President Putin, perhaps suggesting just quite how strong this relationship is, even after she's no longer the Chancellor. Both leaders spoke each other's language, Russian and German, and throughout the past almost 2 decades, they have often seen eye to eye on the issue, eye to eye on issues, even if they don't agree on issues. They have been able to communicate very well. It will be a very big challenge for whoever steps in and takes her place.
Stuart Smith in Moscow, thanks very much.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, recriminations and regrets. UK politicians and Afghans who call Britain home reflect on 7 days that shook the world.
Search CGTN Europe wherever you get your podcasts to subscribe to the Agenda podcast. The Agenda with me, Stephen Cole, always gets to the heart of the story. Just subscribe today and listen now.
Covering the world from 4 continents. A new horizon. Teams in Beijing, Washington, D.C., Nairobi, and London. Who connect, interact, and inquire to bring you the stories that matter to all. The Link, only on CGTN. Facing the unknown is always difficult. In a world in turmoil, it's easy to lose orientation. But when the storms come, we have to see the possibilities. Reinvent. Find new opportunities. Discover a path forward. CGTN. See the difference.
The world has changed under the pressure of the pandemic. For many of us, life is returning to some kind of normal. As as we're adapting to changes in all of our lives, let Global Business Europe be your guide to the new normal. Join us weekdays on CGTN.
Welcome back to Global Business Europe. And a reminder for you that CGTN is available to watch for free on all the major digital platforms, on Smart TV or online on Roku, Apple TV, Amazon Fire and Android TV, YouTube and Dailymotion, CGTN.com and the CGTN app. And in the UK, we're available 24 hours a day on Freeview.
And staying with our top story on Afghanistan, thousands of people are desperately trying to escape, fearing for their lives under Taliban rule. The former Afghan president Ashraf Ghani fled as Kabul was about to fall and has now taken refuge in the United Arab Emirates. Jim Spenman reports from Dubai.
The UAE confirmed on Wednesday they'd welcomed Ghani and his family to the Emirates on, quote, humanitarian grounds. The leader has been criticized in some quarters for his sudden departure, just as Taliban forces entered Kabul on Sunday. Speaking from here in the UAE, Ghani insisted that he'd left the Afghan capital on the advice of government officials to avoid bloodshed. He strongly denied reports of leaving the country with large sums of money. In a video message posted on Facebook, the former leader also spoke of wanting to prevent Afghanistan from becoming another Syria or Yemen and shared fears of being hanged had he remained in the country. The statement was released as thousands of vulnerable Afghans, including local translators who had worked for the U.S. military and its allies, were desperately waiting to be airlifted out of the country, fearing the prospect of retaliation by the Taliban. According to the U.S. military, more than 5,200 American troops are currently guarding Kabul's international airport, with fighter jets flying over the city to ensure the evacuation of diplomats and civilians, including some Afghan citizens, as those left behind face an uncertain future. Jim Stenman, CGTN, Dubai.
The Taliban is trying to present itself as a changed entity, repeatedly saying it plans to form an inclusive government. But Professor Michael Semple, an expert on the militant group and a former EU envoy, says that will never happen.
It's totally unrealistic. They have talked about this for the past 3 years, failed to do it in negotiations before they captured power. Now they have captured power. They've installed their people in all the key institutions of the state. They have told their supporters that we, the Taliban, have taken over power. We do not need any partners. It's complete eyewash to say that there will be an inclusive administration. It's impossible. It's not going to happen.
So what will a Taliban government look like, do you think?
The best guide to what a Taliban government will look like will be the government which they ran in the 1990s, from 96 through to 2001. Narrowly based, run by Sunni clerics who they consider to be loyal to the movement. Now, some of these people we now sort of know, we're familiar with them from the negotiations in Qatar. People like Mullah Bradar, of course, ought to be in charge or in leading positions. But the key thing about it is an administration to be run by clerics who have been loyal to this armed movement. And of course, all power rests within this movement, with none of the old trappings of parliament or representative democracy as Afghans have experienced for the past 20 years.
What kind of relationship will they be able to maintain with the nations they share borders with, Pakistan in particular?
Well, I think that both Pakistan and the Taliban expect to be able to start off with a relatively comfortable relationship, given that Pakistan has been the main covert backer of the Taliban throughout their long struggle. But it's also possible that there will be headaches quite early on because the Taliban are supremely confident now, as far as they're concerned, right or wrong. They've just pulled off this great military victory over a superpower. They've done what many people thought they would not be able to do. They don't want to listen to advice or guidance from anybody, even their closest friends. So it's likely that there will be friction in that relationship. One of the possible sources of tension is that many Pakistani extremists, Islamic militants, have been operating inside Afghanistan. The Pakistan Intelligence Service expects the Taliban to try and restrain those men. But as a jihadi movement taking over control of the state, the Taliban also feel loyal to their old comrades. So now that they are at the peak of their power again, they're extremely loath to listen to Pakistani requests to deal with or arrest or restrain those militants.
The British Prime Minister Boris Johnson has just finished chairing a Cobra Emergency Committee meeting to discuss Afghanistan, but the row over the handling of the Afghanistan crisis and the preparedness for the Taliban takeover continues to reverberate far beyond Kabul. Well, let's talk now to our correspondent Naweed Jabarkil. Naweed, one of the government's biggest priorities now, they say, is evacuating people from Kabul.
Yeah, absolutely. The UK says that it wants to get about 7,000 UK citizens and Afghan staff who've helped the UK government's efforts in the country over the past 2 decades out. According to the Daily Mail, a newspaper here in the UK, about 3,800 have managed to be taken out, so that leaves just over 3,000 more to be brought out. But we have seen on social media some planes reportedly leaving empty from Kabul. That's unlikely to help the government's messaging that it's doing all it can to try and prevent this. In addition to that, we've heard from Boris Johnson in the last few minutes as well. He said that the UK government is, quote, committed to Afghanistan and will work with the Taliban if needed. Now, that's really important because it signals a realisation or an acceptance, if you like, from the UK, a major power in the US-led invasion of Afghanistan, that the Taliban will need to be involved in some degree in what comes next politically in Afghanistan. Aside from that, he also said that he has, quote, absolute confidence in Foreign Secretary Dominic Raab. This is the other story politically causing a lot of headache for the government here. Dominic Raab, it's now emerged that the call that he didn't actually take place. He's come out and he's defended himself as well, saying that in any event, the Afghan foreign minister who he was supposed to call, he said that he was delegated it to a junior minister. It's emerged that call never took place. This is what Mr. Raab had to say about that. He said, in any event, the Afghan foreign minister agreed to take the call, but was unable to because of the rapidly deteriorating situation. Appears that Mr. Raab is trying to push the blame perhaps onto the Afghan side, but it hasn't stopped the chorus of calls here for him to resign. Among those now, the former head Secretary-General of NATO, George Robertson, who says that it was, quote, a dereliction of duty, that while he was on holiday, he didn't drop everything and try and get British citizens and Afghan staff out of the country.
The Taliban is saying that journalists, including female journalists, can continue working, but those pledges are already being broken, aren't they?
And it's not just with regards to journalists, but several other key policy areas that the Taliban are being tested on at the moment, and there appear to be cracks forming. The German broadcaster Deutsche Welle says that 3 of its journalists' homes have been raided by the Taliban. It says that one in particular, when they tried to find him, they were unable to, and they killed a family member and also seriously injured another. That journalist is thought to be, according to DW, now in Germany, and we understand that he was an editor at the company. But they were quite forceful in their criticism of the Taliban. It's not just DW, but a few other media organisations, international ones in particular, really worried about their staff on the ground. We've seen those scenes in Kabul airport from the likes of Western media, and it does look tense what's happening there. Many now are trying to take their staff out of there. The Wall Street Journal in the last hour tweeting its editor-in-chief saying that 76 of its staff were taken out to Qatar in the Middle East. But the question of journalism is a really, really important one. We heard from one voice in the country, Saad Mohseni, who heads Mobi Group, and it was the largest media group in Afghanistan. It still is the head of Tolo TV, which is quite a famous name in Afghanistan. And he said that the Taliban needs to give guidance in terms of what, for example, women should be wearing. He said if there are rules changing, they need to be decreed to us. Otherwise, at the moment, there seems to be this confusion. But journalism is really important because in the past 2 decades, it's been a real success story in Afghanistan. Lots of young journalists, lots of good journalists have emerged, particularly female journalists, saying that they want to hold power to account. That could be under threat now, it seems, if the Taliban chooses to crack down on journalists. For its part, it says that people can report freely in the country. Their women's rights are protected as long as they're in accordance with Sharia or Islamic law.
You have friends and family in Afghanistan. What are you hearing on the ground?
Yeah, well, it's been a pretty tense week, really. The first day, Sunday, after the Taliban moved in on Kabul, took over, I was obviously lots of worry, like lots of millions of Afghan diaspora around the world, calling first cousins I have there, uncles, and checking in on them. And the response has been the same. It was basically we're staying indoors, trying to minimize how much we go out. And that's a message I've been hearing from lots of Afghans that I've been speaking to here in London. A lot of them are concerned. Remember, this is 4 decades of conflict in Afghanistan. For most of us, my generation, for my parents' generation, this is all they've really known. And I think across the world, Afghans are looking, whether they were born there, whether they're in the country, outside the country, just looking and are worried about what comes next, and also concerned, not just for the people there, but the future of this country and the suffering of people for more than 4 decades of conflict now.
Luigi Barkle, thank you very much.
Well, even before the Taliban takeover, Germany had resettled tens of thousands of Afghans who were fleeing danger at home. And with an election in Germany just over a month away, the asylum debate is once again a focus of the campaign. Ryan Thompson reports.
Thousands of miles from Kabul, this Afghan family cannot fathom what's happened to their homeland. They watch as Taliban leaders now appear on the national news and worry about friends and family stuck under their rule.
We fought for everything, for every of these laws and policies, these reformist policies. Now we are again back to the zero, level.
The family has called Germany home for 4 years. They're one of tens of thousands of Afghan households resettled by German authorities. In the past week, they fielded dozens of calls from desperate friends looking for a way out.
I cannot help them, and that's something that bothers me a lot. But I try to talk to them and to find out whether they're alive, and that's the least I can do.
It's unlikely that Germany will allow a large number of refugees to settle here, as it has done in the past. 2015 saw the decision by Chancellor Angela Merkel to allow more than 1 million people from war-ravaged countries like Syria to settle here. The decision proved controversial and has had a lasting impact on German politics. Far-right parties champion that the country has become a so-called top destination for asylum seekers. In the years after the 2015 decision, they saw a major boost in voter support. Today, even Merkel's own party has been less tolerant, and the CDU party leader, hoping to succeed her, was quick to say the door would be closed.
2015 must not repeat itself. We need an orderly protection for those who are heading towards Europe.
But the CDU is not a shoo-in this election cycle, and the increasingly prominent Green Party has called for a different approach.
In this moment, it shouldn't be about what does this mean for us as Germany, but it should be about how can we rescue as many people as fast as possible. Not talking about bureaucracy and visa, but just talking about how to get the people out there and to save lives.
Well, current polling is showing that your party, the Green Party, could potentially be leading a government or leading a coalition. So if you are in that position, what would you be doing differently?
I think, first of all, we will have a politics that are looking into the future and not just reacting to a crisis when it's already here.
Politics aside, foreign policy is still the responsibility of Angela Merkel for another month. She says up to 10,000 people will be taken back to Germany and has promised that includes the Afghans who helped the country. Ryan Thompson, CGTN, Frankfurt.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, the long road to freedom, the story of the people struggling to escape Afghanistan for a new life in the West.
the EU's digital COVID certificate, which offers the promise of unlocking hassle-free travel around Europe this summer.
In less than 2 weeks' time, the Czech border will also open to all EU and Serbian citizens. 4.4 million Hungarians received their first dose of COVID vaccine.
18 and over can receive a COVID-19 vaccination, but it does come with conditions.
Third wave will probably take longer to emerge. This vaccination centre is part of a massive effort to try and drive down the numbers of the new variant that was first identified in India.
On the agenda with me, Stephen Cole, we look up into space. We look down into data. We look at debt. We look at politics. We look at opioids, climate change. We look at all the issues that really matter around the world. But you matter too. We want to tell the stories you want to see and hear about. Make it your agenda.
We can try out the wild and crazy ideas.
Nothing can stop an idea whose time has come, and this idea is coming.
I actually feel quite comfortable in isolation.
We should all be very basic when we're trying to save the world.
Awesome!
We hope it will happen. We have to live in hope.
The agreement is signed. But what is the real deal now the UK has left the EU? For trade, for business, for the city, for ordinary people. Make sense of Brexit with CGTN.
Welcome back to Global Business Europe with Jamie Owen and Robin Dwyer. Afghans wait in hope as the international evacuation operation at Kabul airport is intensified amid reports of murders and torture at the hands of the Taliban.
Our other headlines, NATO foreign ministers meet in emergency session urging the Taliban to allow safe passage of all foreign nationals.
And Merkel in Moscow. The German Chancellor meets President Putin with Afghanistan and Alexei Navalny on the agenda. The Taliban is working hard to convince the international community that it has no ambitions beyond Afghanistan, and it's drastically changed over the past 2 decades. But returning to our interview with Professor Michael Semple, he told us that he doesn't believe the claims. He says the group's first priority will be to consolidate power and snuff out any attempts at resistance.
They will be pushing for international legitimacy and ultimately recognition. However, there's another set of priorities that they clearly haven't factored in, or else they wouldn't have pushed ahead with this military offensive across Afghanistan, which is feeding the population. Afghanistan has more than 30 million people. There is an economic crisis which is basically underreported. There was anyway a drought before we had this military offensive. Millions of Afghans are dependent directly or indirectly upon livelihoods coming from the Afghan government or the donors working in the country. That is all suddenly at a halt. Prices in many places have doubled through the disruption associated with the military campaign. Money is drying up. People will, within days, people are going to be feeling hungry and going to the Taliban and say, OK, you insisted on taking the country. How are you going to feed us?
America's departure has, of course, left a void. Who do you think's likely to fill it?
Well, in the first place, Pakistan is going to feel buoyed about its ability to fill that void. Because they both have relations with, they have relations with the United States, they have relations with China, and they have a deep relationship with the Taliban. Some of the securocrats in Islamabad, as far as they're concerned, they've swept the board, and now they can step into the shoes that they have been vacated by the Americans. I think this is going to be difficult for many of the other regional powers to stomach. Already the Iranians are pushing back and saying that the story is not over until there's a broad-based government inside Afghanistan. Many of the other regional powers like Russia, the Central Asian states, have quietly established relations with the Taliban in the recent years as a sort of an insurance policy against this day. They will be wanting to see just how aggressive or dangerous this Taliban administration is, and I think that many people are they're going to be sort of pushed on the one hand to accept that this is a de facto power. You have to deal with it if you're in the neighborhood, but it's also going to be very difficult to stomach. They're going to have to take a stance on whether or not to support the armed resistance to the Taliban. And I think that China faces a really big question in this. Do they sort of take the advice given to them by the Pakistani security sector, saying the Taliban are basically ours, we can work with them through establishing the relationship with the Taliban, we'll have better security in Afghanistan than was offered under the Western-backed government, a chance to extend the old CPEC project in Pakistan. They bring Afghanistan decisively into the Belt and Road, exploit the mineral resources. That's the prospect which the Pakistan establishment is going to be offering to China. But on the other hand, I mean, China's got to be concerned that this Taliban government offers many problems for us, not least the fact that the Taliban movement, which has taken over, has a long history of harboring Uyghur militants. And the last time that the Taliban were in power in 2001, as pressure from the Americans started to grow, China sent a delegation to Kabul to talk with the Taliban, seeing if the Taliban were prepared to be flexible on the issue of clamping down on Uyghur militants in the country in return for Chinese assistance. At that stage, the answer was no. The Taliban were not prepared to budge. I'm sure that this time round, China will be looking to see if the Taliban are prepared to be more flexible in dealing with them, and then open up the prospect of China working in cooperation with Pakistan to become a leading power inside Afghanistan.
As the Taliban started gaining ground in early August, thousands of Afghans began to leave, with many headed towards Iran to cross into Turkey. Hundreds have reportedly managed to enter, while many others have failed. The journey is not an easy one, and one group of people play a key role in the process: smugglers. CGTN's Mikhail Badavid reports.
Turkey's border city of Van has been very active lately. Business has been booming for one specific group of people: migrant smugglers.
Though hundreds of Afghans have reportedly entered Turkey over the past few weeks, crossing the border is a perilous journey. The terrain is difficult, the weather is hot, and security has been tightened. Many Afghans say they failed several times before making it through.
Zeynep is from the Afghan city of Herat, where she used to work as a wedding photographer. She says she was living in constant fear of the Taliban, especially as a working woman. She first fled to Iran and then decided to cross into Turkey's border city.
On my first attempt, I was on the road for 2 nights before arriving in Van. I stayed at a safe house for 1 night. The next day, police raided the house and kept us at a repatriation center for 7 days.
But Zeynep has a disabled son and says she didn't give up for him.
On our second try, we came through a different path. We walked for 8 hours, but it took us a month to enter. Turkish police kept chasing us. We made it through on our 6th attempt.
The kind of passage fleeing refugees experience is very much dependent on the migrant smuggler they deal with. This Afghan man, who wanted to remain anonymous and refuses being labeled a smuggler, says he assists people who are seeking safety.
The smugglers say to the immigrants, "We will pass you through the roads where we are in contact with the police. Even if they see you, they will ignore you. We're going to get you across that border somehow because we pay them in return. So that's why we're taking this path."
According to this man aiding refugees, smugglers can also be misleading about the difficulties of the journey.
Migrants are told that a 15-hour road will take them 3 hours to walk, and then there are people on those roads whose hands and feet are injured, and then they are left behind because there is still a long distance to walk.
Despite the struggles refugees face while trying to cross borders illegally, thousands continue to take the risks involved. Experts are anticipating that a large number of Afghans fleeing the Taliban may soon be heading towards Turkey. Michal Bardavit, CGTN, Van, Turkey.
Well, the Taliban now face the challenge of running a government in Afghanistan, things like paying the salaries of state workers and running public services. But access to both the group's own bank accounts and central bank reserves have been frozen, while international support has been suspended. Zubair Iqbal is from the Washington-based Middle East Institute. I asked him about the challenges ahead.
Well, it's very interesting because remember that 75% of government spending is funded by foreign aid. But however, what happens is that under the current circumstances, the formal sector of the economy is relatively small as compared to the informal sector, which is not affected. At this moment, what we are seeing is that if the foreign assistance is withdrawn for the whole year, the economy could contract by double digits, about 11 to 15% over the year itself, which is a terrible thing because it will definitely increase a very large increase in unemployment in the economy, and poverty levels will go up.
Give us a sense, if you can, of how robust you think Afghanistan's economy is.
Well, it is a very fragile economy. Remember that a substantial part of the economy is the informal sector of the economy, where operations take place which have nothing to do with the government policy itself. It benefits from increased spending, but then it has its own life, it has its own existence, it continues to go on of its own in relations with other countries in the region, as well as within the country. Informal sector includes drugs, as well as quite a bit of agriculture and domestic trade. So in a way, they're not affected. However, government facilities and government services tend to fall. When they fall, the urban sectors are very badly affected. And remember, much of the political support that the present or the previous government had was from the urban sectors.
There is a terrible irony about all of this, isn't there, in a sense, because Afghanistan is hugely wealthy. It's wealthy in mineral resource. I think the mineral wealth of Afghanistan is estimated to be at around $3 trillion. Can the Taliban successfully tap that wealth?
Not really. You see, it's a long-term issue. It's not a short-term issue. Number one, it requires massive amount of investments and massive amount of infrastructure to be developed, which takes time and a lot of money. And under the circumstances, Afghanistan has neither of the two. Somebody else has to come from outside and has to have guarantees for the security and protection of those investments, and then provide a long-term guarantee that nothing will be done to alter the terms and conditions on which the investments will take place.
If that's long-term, what is short-term and has historically always been successful at pulling in short-term cash is the drugs trade. How do you see that over the short term, over the coming few years?
Well, look, I think the drug issue is overplayed. The total revenue that the Taliban collected last year from drug trade was about 30% of the total, which is about $450 million equivalent. Now, that's not much. And remember, the drug trade sector covers only about 6 to 7% of GDP. So I don't think that that's going to be the panacea. That's not going to be the source of saving the country in the short term.
Just one final thought. The Taliban clearly are very resourceful and successful at sweeping through the country in terms of their military and intelligence ability. I wonder about their ability to transition to government. How effective will they be in terms of collecting tax and simply running public services?
Oh, this is a very hard question to answer. Look, it all depends upon what's the attitude of the Taliban towards the next government. If the purpose is to have a cohesive government, an inclusive government, then there is a possibility that the skills become available from other sources and other parties. The Taliban themselves, I doubt that they'll be able to do much, even though they've been able to collect revenues, substantial amount of revenues at the borders after having captured those border posts. But there's only a limit to which they can do it.
Hong Kong stocks have been pushed into a bear market, falling 20% from recent highs as investors sell tech stocks on worries over China's new data privacy law. The law, one of the world's strictest, will curb data collection by technology companies and could limit their ability to grow their businesses. Beijing says the law is designed to protect online user data privacy and will come into effect on the 1st of November.
One of the world's biggest mining companies, BHP, has fired 48 employees for sexual assault and harassment at its sites in Australia. The cases included 2 counts of rape. It's part of a government investigation. It comes as the sector struggles with a dire skills shortage and low female representation.
The UK's 4th largest supermarket, Morrison's, has accepted an improved $9.5 billion takeover bid from the US private equity giant Clayton, Duvier and Rice. The board had previously recommended investors accept an offer from a consortium led by Fortress Investment Group. The shares jumped on the news above the level of the agreed offer, suggesting the battle for the British chain may not yet be over.
Malaysia's king has appointed a new prime minister, its 3rd leader in 3 years. Ismail Sabri will be sworn in on Saturday. The previous prime minister stepped down on Monday after losing majority support in parliament over infighting among his political coalition. Ryan Meltzer reports from Kuala Lumpur.
Having met with 114 members of parliament on Thursday and then conferred with the state sultans on Friday, Malaysia's king decided that Ismail Sabri Yaakob was the person most likely to command the support of the majority of members of parliament. But it's the slimmest of majorities at just 4. Ismail held several relatively junior cabinet posts in UMNO governments before Muhyiddin Yassin became prime minister last year and appointed him senior minister for security, in charge of COVID control protocols and lockdowns. He was also briefly deputy prime minister just before Muhyiddin was forced to step down. As such, Ismail is seen by many here as culpable in the previous government's failure to properly control the pandemic. The country has seen sharply escalating COVID cases in recent weeks, despite various lockdowns and record numbers for the past 3 straight days. Essentially, Ismail will lead pretty much the same administration as the one that just lost power on Monday. No doubt there'll be some shuffling of cabinet positions, but basically it's just a change at the top, albeit with someone with a far less distinguished political career taking over in the midst of the pandemic and with the country's economy in serious trouble. Ryan Meltzer, CGTN, Kuala Lumpur.
We're getting reports that 2 Chinese nationals have been killed in Pakistan in an apparent suicide bombing. 2 children are feared dead after the explosion. The attacks thought to have happened in the southwest, targeting a group of Chinese who were travelling in a vehicle. 3 others were injured. We'll bring you more details when we get them.
The UK has published details of sanctions against 7 alleged Russian intelligence agents suspected of poisoning the Kremlin critic Alexei Navalny. The opposition leader was flown to Germany for medical treatment last August after being poisoned with a nerve agent. He's now in a Russian jail. Meanwhile, Russia's communications watchdog has demanded that Google and Apple remove an app from their stores, which is run by Navalny's supporters.
A Spanish helicopter has rescued the sole survivor of a capsized migrant dinghy off the Canary Islands. The woman was found by a cargo ship 135 miles away from the islands. 2 bodies were recovered from the sea and the remaining 37 other migrants in the boat are feared dead.
Australia's largest city, Sydney, has extended its lockdown for another month as authorities struggle to contain a fast-spreading COVID outbreak. The government also introduced a partial curfew for virus hotspots and limited people in those places to 1 hour of outdoor exercise a day. The city is currently reporting over 600 cases each day, and the number shows little sign of falling.
And New Zealand's also extended its strict nationwide lockdown for 4 days after more COVID-19 cases were identified. Infections have now spread beyond the largest city of Auckland to the capital, Wellington. It's the country's first outbreak of the Delta variant. New Zealanders have been living virus-free and without restrictions since February.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead. Out of this world, China's astronauts step outside to carry out critical work on its space station.
Coming up on Razor, the long trek home. After captivating the world with a record-breaking 1,300-kilometre journey across China, this herd of Asian elephants is finally heading back to their reserve.
Actually, they're already reaching to the place with a similar vegetation type and similar climates, so which is good.
Hello, welcome back to Global Business Europe. A new coronavirus treatment has been approved for use in the UK. The regulator says the drug Ronapreve, which uses a pair of laboratory-made antibodies to attack the virus, can prevent infection and reduce the need for hospital treatment. Unlike other treatments that calm the body's overactive immune system, the antibody therapy attacks the virus. Despite the promising results, the cost of this drug means it will only be given to people who are at risk of becoming seriously ill.
More than 60% of the French population is now fully vaccinated against COVID-19, but that rate is slowing. President Macron is urging people to get jabbed as soon as possible, but for those in deprived neighbourhoods, it's not that easy. Ross Cullen reports from Paris.
This is Porte de la Villette in northeast Paris. It's a meeting point, a marketplace, a melting pot of different nationalities and backgrounds. It's also where a mobile vaccination clinic is run by Médecins Sans Frontières, also known as MSF.
They don't want to go into a regular vaccine center because they can be worried about the fact that they are in an irregular situation. And we have people that think that they can't be vaccinated because they don't have any social insurance, for example. We know that this population, they are sometimes a bit suspicious on all the institutions. So we can reach them because of the fact that we are Médecins Sans Frontières, probably.
It's an outreach place of healthcare without judgment, vaccination without preconditions, run by Doctors Without Borders.
It's important to avoid coronavirus, to protect my family, my friends, everyone. The vaccine is important for everybody.
I'm getting vaccinated to protect myself, first off, and also my family and my fellow citizens, to try to prevent getting COVID-19.
Millions of French citizens booked their vaccinations on their phone or online, but that's not an option for lots of people here. And it's now obligatory to show proof of a vaccination to access bars, cinemas and long-distance trains. For many of these people, simple healthcare is all they are looking for.
There are lots of mobile vaccination tents in the centre of Paris, but it's also important to set up pop-up vaccination clinics in places like this, to make it as easy as possible to get the vaccine to people living in difficult social situations.
People come to France from many countries in North and West Africa, as well as Asia, from Palestine, Afghanistan and Bangladesh. They may not speak French or English, and so MSF provides a multilingual translator on site and further language support on the phone if needed.
We have a lot of the refugees, we have a lot of asylum seekers. We also saw like the peoples because they are stay in the roads. Actually, we are helping refugees and people they stay in the roads because they doesn't have the shelters. We are helping them.
Like any city, there are many people here in Paris who are not as privileged or do not have access to the same advantages as others. But anyone can catch COVID-19 and everyone needs to be protected from the pandemic. Ross Cullen, CGTN, Paris.
NASA has agreed to temporarily halt work on a $2.9 billion moon lander contract awarded to Elon Musk's SpaceX. It comes after the rocket company Blue Origin, founded by rival billionaire businessman Jeff Bezos, sued the U.S. government. Last month, the government's Accountability Office sided with NASA over its decision to pick a single lunar lander provider, rejecting Blue Origin.
Now, for many of us, the weekend is usually the time to get round to some DIY jobs, repairing and fixing things around the house, and so too in space. The crew of China's Shenzhou 12 space station, that is still under construction, have just completed their second spacewalk and returned to the core module. They finished installing a key component on the robot arm. Tasks also included installing heat control equipment and positioning the external camera. Sunye reports.
A few hours ago, the China Space Manned Space Office declared the second extravehicular or EVA activity for Chinese taikonauts a complete success. Now, taikonaut Nian Haishen and Liu Boming completed a 6-hour-plus spacewalking without a glitch. The whole process actually managed to complete ahead of schedule. That's also partly thanks to all the data and experiences they gathered from that last spacewalk in early July. And for every one of the scientists and engineers we talked to here today at the Beijing Control Center, they've been telling us today's successful second EVA activity will further contribute to future activities. They also expect that spacewalking will become an ever more regular part of Chinese taikonauts' job.
Europe.cgtn.com has all the week's top stories from China. Here's a quick look. All that and more at Europe.cgtn.com.
The images from Afghanistan over the past week have been uncomfortable echoes for many of the U.S. evacuations from Saigon and Phnom Penh in the 1970s. CGTN's Stephen Cole has been talking to the American journalist Jim Laurie, who reported from Vietnam and Cambodia. He asked him what effect Afghanistan might have on the world's perception of the United States.
I think that once again, as it did in 1975, the question of the reliability of America comes up. Is the United States, are their promises willing to be kept? Will they be kept? Can they be believed? And I think once again, this reinforces the notion that America is not necessarily a reliable partner. The mission in Afghanistan, the original mission, was not to rebuild a country. The original mission was to rid Afghanistan of those radical elements, al-Qaeda elements, that were threatening directly United States issues. And of course, every nation in the world shapes their policies based upon selfish national interests. It was the whole nation-building aspect that got out of control, it seems to me, and that is the problem, the crux of the problem that we have today. Lifting up the hopes. And I remember standing in front of the American embassy in Saigon after the fall and having a young woman come up to me with her American identification card and saying, "They left me behind. They betrayed me. Why did they do this?" You see the same scenario playing out today.
And you can see more of that interview on the agenda with Stephen Cole this weekend here on CGTN.
The headlines again. Afghans wait in hope as the international evacuation operation at Kabul airport is intensified amid reports of murders and torture at the hands of the Taliban.
Our other headlines: NATO foreign ministers meet an emergency session urging the Taliban to allow safe passage of foreign nationals.
And Merkel in Moscow. The German Chancellor meets President Putin with Afghanistan and Alexei Navalny on the agenda.
And that's it for Global Business Europe. Thank you for watching.
More on all our stories at Europe.cgtn.com, and do follow CGTN Europe on Twitter, Facebook and Instagram. We're on smart TV apps, Roku, Apple TV, Amazon Fire and Android TV, YouTube and Dailymotion, CGTN.com and the CGTN app. And in the UK, 24 hours a day on Freeview.
From all of the team in London, it's goodbye.